President Trump is using the world stage to criticize top U.S. allies.
It happened at the NATO summit where the president targeted Germany, accusing it of being too cozy with Russia. KCAL 9 political reporter Bryan is here now with details. Dave?
Well, in fact, the president was not making a lot of new friends in the NATO crowd today by any imagination. President Trump ripped one of America's most loyal allies, Germany, for agreeing to a natural gas project with Russia and then expecting the U.S. to help defend Germany through NATO. And he all but called many NATO nations deadbeats for not paying for their fair share for NATO defense projects. But critics charge he's cutting off NATO at the knees, weakening one of the key defense alliances for Europe and the U.S.
But Germany is totally controlled by Russia.
Just hours before a bilateral meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, President Trump threw some gasoline on the fire.
They pay billions of dollars to Russia, and now we have to defend them against Russia.
Mr. Trump opposes a pipeline deal to sell natural gas from Russia to Germany, which is far less expensive than buying the gas from the U.S.
I've been complaining about this from the time I got in. It should have never been allowed to have happened.
The president later tweeted, "The U.S. is paying for Europe's protection, then loses billions on trade. Must pay 2% of GDP immediately, not by 2025. The fact of the matter is the president is now pushing for a raise to 4% GDP.
Many countries owe us a tremendous amount of money for many years back, where they're delinquent, as far as I'm concerned.
Right now, only 5 of the 29 NATO nations have even reached the 2% goal, much less 4%. The U.S. is at 3.5% this year, $685 billion last year. But the fees are only a voluntary recommendation to NATO members, not a mandated hard and fast amount to be paid for membership. And they're not delinquent, despite President Trump's statement that as far as he's concerned, they are. European leaders acknowledged the president's concerns. But when the NATO Secretary General tried to keep the peace, he didn't seem to get very far.
We are stronger together than apart.
But how can you be together when a country is getting its energy from the person you want protection against or from the group that you want protection?
Because we understand that when we stand together also when dealing with Russia, we are stronger.
Merkel told reporters before her meeting with Trump that she grew up in communist East Germany and indicated she understands from personal experience about the dangers of Russia and communism and doesn't need to be lectured about it. Germany is united in freedom, she said, so we can make our own independent policies and our own independent decisions. Mr. Trump's tough words didn't sit well with former Secretary of State John Kerry, a Democrat. In an open letter posted on Twitter, Kerry wrote, "The president set America back this morning. He is steadily destroying our reputation in the world. He is undermining our interests. He diminishes alliances we built to safeguard an economic and strategic force that has allowed millions of people to live in freedom. Moreover, he displays a woeful ignorance of the work his predecessor's administration did to increase European defense spending." Even some Republicans are now concerned.
Sometimes it feels like we punch our friends in the nose and hold our hand out to people that are working strongly against us, like Russia.
But Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, while acknowledging that NATO is indispensable to stability and democracy in Europe, says the president is right to insist that NATO members put their money where their mouth is.
And the president is right to point out that our NATO allies need to adhere to their commitments, which is 2% of GDP for defense. Germany is the largest economy in the EU. Germany should be committing 2%.
Former Supreme Commander of NATO, retired 4-star General Wesley Clark, charges President Trump's tough guy approach to NATO is damaging the alliance.
That's what our allies are concerned about, and they're still concerned, especially when they consider that he's going to see Vladimir Putin. He says that's going to be easy. So he's cozy with our potential adversaries. He's tough on our friends and allies. It's not a good way to build teamwork.
Now, President Trump's upcoming meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in search of a better relationship is really disturbing, deeply disturbing to many of the NATO allies who see Russia as the biggest threat to democracy in the region. The two leaders will hold a summit next week in Helsinki, Finland.